Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Arnold Panaro. I'm chairman of the board of the executive committee of NDIA. And on behalf of our vice chairman, Michael Bayer, our chairman emeritus, Dick McCon, our executive committee, a couple of members here today, I want to welcome all of you to the Emerging Technologies Institute formal launch events. Those of you that are here in person, welcome. Those online and in the live C-SPAN audience, we think we've got a really exciting program for you here today. In terms of the threats we face as a nation, and as we emerge from the unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic, our economy and our national security are at an inflection point. Technological advances will pave the way forward for both the economic and military successes of our nation's future. In furtherance of that goal, we are putting the full force of NDIA's financial strength, our nationwide network of 50 chapters, 30 NDIA chapters, 20 Women in Defense chapters nationwide, our 27 divisions, our 1,600 corporate companies that are members spread across some 3,500 facilities across our nation, as well as our considerable expertise in promoting constructive dialogue between government and the private sector to create and support the Emerging Technologies Institute. As an independent affiliate of NDIA, ETI will identify and promote the technological advances most essential to our country's economic competitive needs and success, and these same technologies will be fundamental to any future conflict, both from a deterrence as well as a warfighting standpoint. Just like NDIA's leaders saw the need over 100 years ago when NDIA was founded to change the direction of the role of the private sector and the government, we, the leaders of NDIA today, see a compelling need again to shift that direction. I want to personally thank the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General John Hyten, for helping underscore the importance of technology to our military's future. As someone who was present in 1986, when the Senate Armed Services Committee created the position of Vice Chairman to focus on requirements and technology issues and others, I know that Senator Barry Goldwater, then chairman of that committee, would be thrilled to see General Hyten in this role. And my boss, Senator Sam Nunn, the ranking member at the time, I know he would consider General Hyten to be the greatest embodiment of what these two authors envisioned when that position was created. I want to say we also want to offer our congratulations to Heidi Shue. As most of you know, she was just confirmed as the USD for Research and Engineering, and we look forward to working with her and her team as we move forward. And a warm welcome and thank you to several of our inaugural ETI Advisory Board members for being here today as well. The Honorable Mac Thornberry, former Texas Congressman and Chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, and you will have a more fulsome introduction a little later in the program. The Honorable Ellen Lord, the former Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment. Let me just say that when COVID was hitting its peak and states around our nation were shutting down industries, and particularly was having an impact on our defense industrial base, Ellen Lord led from the front with her colleague and Deputy Al Schaefer. And when, for example, I'll just give you one small example of a small company that was a member of NDIA, got in touch with us, and we got in touch with Ellen, and they were being told in a western state they had to shut down their company, and they produced a small but essential element of the nuclear deterrent. Ellen got on the phone with the senior leaders of that state and made sure that our companies and our people could go to work. And Hawk was on the phone with Ellen's team, Al, Kim Harrington, the industrial policy folks day to day. And this is the kind of government industry relationship that's really important. Then it's important now, and it'll be very important as we deal with emerging technology. So Ellen, thank you. Thank Alan and all that team for that. We also have Paul Madeira, the co-founder of Meritech, a great Silicon Valley leader, and a colleague of Michael Bayer's and I on the Defense Business Board when we were members of that board. Mitch Daniels, the president of Purdue University, could not be with us today, but continues as a champion in this field. And we're hosting our second annual Hypersonics Conference with Purdue and Notre Dame in the coming weeks. And I saw Laura McAleer, the lead here from Notre Dame. So these two universities and the state of Indiana have taken a fabulous direction forward in this hypersonic era. We've got a couple of other very important distinguished guests. All of you are distinguished. General Norty Schwartz, the 19th Chief of Staff of the Air Force and now head of the Institute for Defense Analysis, one of the, if not the premier analytical FFRDC in our country. Al Schaefer, I've already mentioned, Ellen's deputy, Lieutenant General retired Jay Silveria, the executive director of the Bush School at Texas A&M, where we just had a JADC2 conference with NDIA. Dr. Bill LaPlante, the head of Draper Labs, former head of Air Force Acquisition and a member of our NDIA board. Victoria Coleman, the chief scientist of the Air Force, welcome, and Dr. Jillian Bussey, the director of the Joint Hypersonics Transition Office in the Department of Defense. It's also great to see so many of our executive committee, board members, and thought leaders here this morning. As noted, we are streaming this event to a large contingent of the membership and the public at large, and the program will be available online afterwards. It is now my privilege to call on General Hawk Carlisle, the President and CEO of NDIA. Hawk.
Well, thank you, Arnold, very much. I appreciate it. And hey, folks, I just want to thank everyone for being here, and I'll lend my welcome as well. It's great to have many of my battle buddies from my 39 years in the Air Force, General Schwartz, my former boss, and the 19th Chief of Staff, OBD, General Roberson, Jay Silveria, and my alum, Air Staff alum together, Bill LaPlante. Dr. Bill LaPlante, it's great having you here. Really appreciate it. And welcome, everyone. Welcome the streaming audience as well. And as our chairman just indicated, it's really exciting time for us here at NDIA with the Stand Up of the Emerging Technologies Institute. You'll hear us refer to it as ETI for short. That's what we call the Institute, but it's great to have this opportunity to stand it up. I also want to add my congratulations to Heidi Shue, who just got confirmed as the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. It's great to have her in that position. We have a great relationship with the office, and we're really looking forward to working with her and the entire department as we move forward. So now it is really my distinct honor and privilege to introduce our keynote speaker for the ETI rollout, General John Hyten. General Hyten and I have known each other for a very, very, very long time. You could say we grew up in the Air Force together. We sat next to each other in more meetings and conferences than you can begin to imagine. The challenge, of course, was, as you can see, my vertical is a little less. I couldn't see around him. Half the time I couldn't read the slides because I couldn't get around John as we moved forward. But it was great, and I will tell you he's a great friend and just a tremendous human being. And I will tell you the other thing is there is no one other than John Hyten that knows better the need for speed when it comes to getting technology in the hands of our young women and men who serve this nation in uniform. He understands that better than anyone. He's a proponent for it. He's driven the department in that direction, and it's all due to his incredible work. And John has the unique position in the JROC to be able to drive that to where we need it to go and to really move us forward. And I will tell you, I'm gonna date myself with this reference, but John is kind of like the old E.F. Hutton commercial. And it's when John Hyten speaks, everybody listens. So with that, it's great to have a good friend here today. So help me welcome General John Hyten.
So good morning, everybody. It is great to see so many friendly faces this morning. Actually, it's great to see any face, to be honest with you. I tell you, when I became the vice chairman in late 2019, I never expected that I would spend almost all my time for literally 6 months, Secretary Lord, doing nothing but focused on COVID to try to get us somewhere out of that. Working with Deputy Norquist and now Deputy Hicks, trying to get the department to move, get the country to move, and we started to move. And the work that was done with the vaccine, if you want to see what this country can do if you have to go fast, just look at the vaccine. And I tell you what, Dr. Salawi and General Perna don't get enough credit for what they did, to move this country forward in developing a vaccine. A lot of people don't realize that we wrote, checks, taxpayer checks for almost $4 billion in midsummer last year to buy 100 million doses of Moderna, 100 million doses of Pfizer. And we did that before they even started phase 3 clinical trials. Can you imagine, Congressman Thornberry, what the hearings would have been like if they didn't work? Holy cow, but they did, and they do. And because of that, we have an opportunity to get out of it. So I always take an opportunity to just, it's voluntary. I love living in a free country where people get to make their own decisions. I made my decision to take the vaccine. I would encourage you to do the same thing. It makes life a whole lot better. So as I sat down this morning, at the table in front of me was this book that the ETI just published. And it just struck me as I'd prepared my remarks this weekend, the line, two things that are on this. Number one, the modernization quandary. And number two, the Emerging Technologies Institute that published that NDI stood up. And it got me thinking, how the heck did we get to the point where modernization is a quandary? How did we get to the point where we need an Emerging Technologies Institute? That was, gosh, when I joined the Air Force, yes, it was a long, long time ago. And people our age, Hawk, always have a number of problems. One of those is that it was always better back in the day. But holy cow, when I joined the Air Force was about modernization. It was about technology. That's what we lived at. That's what we did. And we took technology and we turned it into operational capabilities fast. And when it didn't work, we threw it away and we went another direction. And we did that quickly without, repercussions or anything, because we knew that the goal was to defeat the Soviet Union. That was the goal. And everybody was on board with that. And we knew we had to go fast in order to do that. Well, for the last 20 years, we've had our eyes and bodies focused on the Middle East. Our eyes have started to move. Our eyes have moved again to the great powers of China and Russia. Our body is slowly moving. Our eyes are there, but our body is still focused on the Middle East in many ways. And we have to, because we have still, the sons and daughters of America in harm's way. So we always have to keep that as a priority. But nonetheless, the great concerns are the great powers of China and Russia, China in particular. And so we have to move again, and we have to move again quickly. And when I came in 2019 to be the vice chairman, I sat down with General Milley, the chairman, and we talked about what my roles are going to be. And if you look at our backgrounds, you can't have any more different backgrounds than the two officers that now serve as the chairman and the vice chairman. General Milley is a Ranger, Army Infantry. I'm space, nukes, cyber. You can't be any different. But it's also amazing is that our great hero is George Marshall, both General Milley and mine. And so we always like to one-up each other with Marshall stories. I won't do that to you today, but because General Milley's not here. If he was here, I would have to tell a Marshall story. Little things like my wife went down to the Milley house for breakfast when the first days here, and Holly Ann Milley breaks out the Everyday China, and it's our Everyday China pattern that we got when we were married in the 1980s, just like they got when they were married in the 1980s. They look in the bookshelves, and Laura says his bookshelves look like your bookshelves. It's the strangest thing. And we sat down and we said, so what are the priorities? And they align themselves pretty easy. Okay, the chairman has a significant focus on the Middle East. I have nuke, space, and cyber aligned pretty good. We came up with a good plan, and then like 3 months in, just like all plans, they failed in contact with the enemy. But the three priorities that I came up with the chairman have been my priorities since the beginning. Priority number one is to make sure I provide the best advice, best military advice I can to the chairman, the Secretary of Defense, and the president whenever asked. Make sure I provide that to the Congress whenever asked. But to make the chairman and the Secretary of Defense successful in everything they do, that's my number one job, is to make sure that happens. My number two and number three priorities were my priorities, and they were to institute speed once again in everything that we do in this department, everything that I touch. And one of the interesting things about being the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is that the deputy secretary and I swear, Secretary Lord, we sit on every panel, and we're at the head of every table, it seems like, in the department, which can be a good thing because you get to know the deputy pretty well. She gets to know me pretty well, and we can move things if we understand what's broken. But holy cow, we'd become bureaucratic in everything that we had done over the last 20 years. when we didn't have great powers to worry about, it was actually okay to put in place significant checks in the system to make sure that nobody made a mistake, that we never moved forward unless we knew exactly what was going to happen, that we tested again to make sure before we fielded there was no risk in the system. We did everything possible to remove risk from the system. We took authorities from the field and put it into committees in the Pentagon. And then the committees in the Pentagon report to Congress. And the Congress had committees to overlook the committees overlooking the field to make sure that we never made a mistake. And that's okay when you don't have a threat staring you in the face. But right now we have significant threats staring us in the face. And China in particular, I hope they're competitors for the rest of my life and the rest of my children's lives and the rest of my grandchildren's lives. I hope they're just competitors and we compete in the world stage, and that would be good. But right now they're building a military capability that is enormous. And they're building new capabilities in nuclear, new capabilities in space, new capabilities in missiles, hypersonic missiles, new capabilities in cyber. And they're doing all of this to challenge the United States. And we have to figure out how to respond to that, not just with the what, but with the speed necessary to stay ahead of any competitor we have in the world. If you're competing in any race, I would hope that your goal is to win that race. If you're competing with a nation for the future of the world, the goal has to be to have your Western way of liberal democracy continue to be the way that we work in the future. That's what we have to do. And in order to do that, we have to put speed back in the program. And then my third priority was to make sure, I never forget the most important thing about our military, and that is the people that serve. And so I hired a special assistant to look at all of the challenges we have on people issues, from family issues to suicide to sexual assault and prevention. She's been a spectacular partner, a spectacular element in the department as we look at all those issues. But for the rest of my remarks today, I'm going to talk about speed, my second priority, because that's why the Emerging Technology Institute is created, to figure out how to take that technology and transition it quickly into our force. And again, somehow we forgot how to do that. So there's two things I'll talk to you about today. Number one is the concept we're using to drive that change. And number two, I'll talk to you about the JROC, the Joint Requirements Oversight Council that General Carlisle talked about, that we're using to basically be the engine that enables the services to go faster. Because actually that's what the JROC is supposed to do. So the joint warfighting concept, it's important to take just 20 seconds and describe what a concept is supposed to be, because a lot of people think if you develop a joint warfighting concept, magically the new capabilities just pop out the other end. That's actually not what a concept is. A concept is supposed to be, is visionary, it's aspirational, it's what could be, not what is. And it's supposed to drive technology, and it's supposed to drive doctrine, and it's supposed to drive new capabilities. Most importantly, a concept is supposed to drive experimentation. If you can imagine a concept of what could be in the future, and that's why we picked 2030, and then say, okay, how do we experiment to actually look at those things? Then you find out what kind of works and what doesn't work, and then you choose the winners, and those turn into future capabilities, and that's where you change doctrine. The new joint warfighting concept doesn't result overnight in new doctrine, because we actually don't know what works. There's so many things in that joint warfighting concept right now, and most of it is still classified. I'm going to talk about a lot at the unclassified level today. But there's so many things that are so aspirational that I'm not even sure that they're achievable. But that's the point, to drive that kind of aspirational goals, to figure out if you could do this, you could create a military that nobody in this world could touch. And what that does, it creates the most powerful deterrent message in the world. And coming from Strategic Command, focused on deterrence for the 3 years I was there, deterrence is the most important job of the United States military, is to make sure that we never go to war. We don't want to go to war. Nobody that wears a uniform wants to go to war. Nobody that's seen war wants to go back and experience war again. So the goal is to deter war, but the only way to deter war, it's George Washington, it's Julius Caesar, it's everybody back through history, is to be prepared for war and to have that capability that nobody will want to challenge. And right now we still have that, but it's a shrinking advantage, and it's shrinking fast. And China is running the race very quickly, and we have to figure out how to stay ahead. So the joint warfighting concept has morphed. The first one actually looked a lot like what we've been doing for the last 20 years, what everybody that wore a uniform the last 20 years understands. And we said if we just do that better, we will actually be able to deal with the threats of the future. And we wrote that down, and we played it in a war game in October of last year. And without overstating the issue, it failed miserably. An aggressive red team that had been studying the United States for the last 20 years just ran rings around us. And they knew exactly what we're going to do before we did it, and they took advantage of it. And that was a red team on our side, but imagine what our actual competitors have been doing for the last 20 years, with probably even more focus, with larger numbers of people. And so we had to take a step back, and we had to take a step back and look broadly and say, okay, what do we miss? Where are we now? And we kind of took not quite a clean sheet approach, because you can never take a clean sheet of paper if you want to get between now and 2030. You have to start with what you have. But as you build it out, the concept we came up with is referred to now as expanded maneuver. And it's expanded maneuver in space and time. In every area that an adversary could move, you have to figure out how to fill that space in time before they can move. And you talk about that in all domains. You talk about that in all commands. You talk about that in all elements of warfare. And then you figure out the adversary is going to try to do that to me. So how do I aggregate my capabilities in order to provide significant effect? And how do I disaggregate to survive in any kind of threat environment? We actually have not done that really for a long time, maybe ever. We always aggregate to fight and aggregate to survive. But in today's world, with hypersonic missiles, with significant long-range fires coming at us from all domains, if you're aggregated and everybody knows where you are, you're vulnerable. But you have to aggregate to mass fires. But it doesn't have to be a physical aggregation. It could be a virtual aggregation from multiple domains acting at the same time under a single command structure that allows the fires to come in on anybody and allows you to disaggregate to survive. That is a simple thing to say, but that is aspirational. That is unbelievably difficult to do. And so we came up with 4, we called them supporting concept. Actually, the first thing we called them was orphans. Orphans because nobody cared for them. Second thing we called them was supporting concepts, and now they're called the functional battles. And the 4 functional battles are pretty simple and straightforward. They're contested logistics, but when's the last time our logistics from the United States into any area of the world was contested? That's probably World War II. It's probably the last time, really. Contested logistics is really difficult to do. And you think magically all the fuel and all the munitions and everything you need magically shows up on an island in the Pacific, when somebody's actually trying to deny you that island in the Pacific and to not deny you the entire supply chain all the way back to the United States. That's a really difficult problem. So contested logistics has been an area of rich study, a rich conversation, and we're changing our entire logistics approach because of it. The second piece is joint fires. And the reason that's an aspirational requirement, and I've been criticized for saying this, is because, in the joint warfighting concept, fires come from all domains and all services, no restrictions. That's where it comes from. Why? Because if fires come from all domains and all services with no restrictions, the adversary can't figure out where they're coming from, and they have no way to defend themselves against that. Now, that's a purely aspirational requirement, but I hope everybody can see that if you could do that, you would change the equation on any future battlefield. Now you have to figure out what is affordable, what is practical, what can you do, where can you bring it from, who can have it. All those kind of things you have to be able to work out. But you should never limit yourself as you begin a concept with what you don't think you can do. So fires need to come from everywhere, all domains, all services, kinetic, non-kinetic. That's the going in position. Then the third element was joint all-domain command and control. Joint all-domain command and control that links everything together and allows a commander, or commanders more specifically, to understand exactly what's going on. And in that joint all-domain command and control structure, there's a number of different critical enablers. Data is probably the most critical enabler of all. The data has to flow everywhere. And data has a very interesting dynamic in that discussion as well, in terms of aggregation and disaggregation. Because as you stand outside the threat radius in the future joint warfighting concept, the goal is to be fully connected to a combat cloud that has all information that you can access at any time, any place. You can pull it all together and with all domain command and control, figure out the best data and be able to act quickly on that. But then as you enter a threat environment, your access to that network, that access, that data is going to be denied. So you have to figure out two things. You have to figure out, one, how I operate once again with mission command, things that we learned as young lieutenants, how to operate with real centralized control but decentralized execution. When you're disconnected from home, disconnected from the structure, you have your mission type orders that tell you exactly what you're supposed to do, what your rules of engagement are, and you go do that based on the best information that you have, and you fight disconnected. But then you have to figure out in this new world how to pop up again, quickly connect to the network, have the information quickly aggregate itself, and then dive back into the threat environment and fire again. So it's the same thing I was talking about on fires. It's aggregating to fire, disaggregating to survive. And that's the way it's going to be in data. That's the way it's going to be across the board. And then the fourth functional battle is the summation of those three elements really all in one. And it's called information advantage. Because if we can do the things I just described, the United States and our allies will have an information advantage over anybody that we possibly face. And that's where some very significant requirements come in for what you have to do in order to maintain information advantage. Because if you think about it, and Congressman Thornberry, Chairman Thornberry for years, the words beat me up come to mind, but that's probably too strong. Tried to educate me on the proper role of the Joint Requirement Oversight Council and the proper role of what we needed to do in order to effectively build capabilities. And so as I looked at this structure and realized what we really need is we need to develop joint interoperability, not at the end, which is how we've been doing it. The services come to the JROC and they build a weapon system, and because of Congress, you have to have an interoperability KPP, which means you have to now interoperate with everybody. But it's already, it doesn't matter whether it's a ship, a tank, an airplane, a satellite, it's already built. Now you're going to try to figure out how to make it integrate with the joint force. How about we try to make it interoperable from the beginning, not at the end? Because that's how you end up with fighters that don't talk to each other. That's how you end up with different capabilities that can't talk to each other, because you're trying to slap everything on the end. You have to build it from the beginning. And so as I sat down with the JROC early on and we were looking at these elements, we knew this was coming. We said, we have to figure out how to go do this. We have to figure out how to do this in the JROC. We have to figure out how to make the JROC do that. And everywhere I went, I got pushback. But fortunately, one of the things I do when I start a new job is I actually go read my orders. I would always recommend that somebody taking a new job go read their orders. And the orders for me come in policy, come in chairman's instructions, and come in the law. And the interesting thing for me in this area, the law. And so Congressman Thornberry, if you'd read, just grab that card right there, because I carry these cards with me now everywhere I go, because I got tired of explaining why we're trying to do this. And so I just said, we're trying to do this because the law tells me to. So this is U.S. Code, Title 10, Section 181 Bravo, that I think you helped write. And I'll have to put my glasses on to read it, but a couple of the things that the JROC is supposed to do. I'll just read one. The JROC should identify new joint military capabilities based on advances in technology and concepts of operation. When's the last time you saw the JROC do that? Identify new joint military capabilities. We haven't. That's been in the law the entire time you were in Congress. I'll talk to Senator Nunn at noon today. Or I'll tell him you said hello. And he's probably going to beat me up on this again. But all we're trying to do is do what the law tells us to do and identify those new joint. So guess what? We just defined the joint requirements for the first time that define what the services have to do. And I just published them this month, early July. And there are now 4 joint strategic directives on the street that tell the services what they have to do in order to build these new capabilities. And the joint strategic directives are entitled a Strategic Directive 4, Contested Logistics, Joint Fires, All Domain Command and Control, and Information Advantage. And to be honest, General Schwartz, the services, the first 6 months, were kind of fighting that process. I know you're shocked to hear that. But it was interesting the day the light bulb went off in everybody's head. And when the light bulb went off, it was easy to see because all of a sudden the services realized, holy cow, if I do that, I don't have to come back to the JROC to ask Mother May on all this stuff ever again. If we just write this down and get it right from the beginning, we don't have to come back. And then you sit down with Ellen Lord, who's rewriting the 5000 series to try to do the same thing with different software acquisition rules, because software has to change. And in the information advantage strategic directives, how you do software is completely different as well. And now you align with the 5000 series. And the cool part of that joint strategic directive is that will feed the DAB, that will feed the tank, and that will feed the DMAG, the budget process. It feeds operations, it feeds budget, it feeds acquisition. And guess what? I happen to sit at the head of the table on those 3 organizations too. Now I'm to the side of Eleanor, I'm to the side of the Deputy Secretary, I'm to the side of the Chairman, but I sit right next to him. And this is the opportunity we have to incorporate speed back in, because to go back to that first priority, the goal is to get speed. And so if you could write the requirement down, and this is what the services have to do right from the beginning, don't come back and ask Mother May I again, just go as fast as you want. That's exactly what you want. That's what Congress intended. That is what we're trying to do, and that's how we have to get there. But we have a challenge, because we've created a bureaucracy that doesn't like to move that fast. It really doesn't. And the only way to defeat that is to knock it down. So we need help from industry. We need help from industry to say, you're getting in our way. We need help from something like the Emerging Technologies Institute, Mark, that actually gets us focused on where we have to go. We need help from Congress, because Congress is going to have to. And the interesting thing about my congressional engagement the last couple of years is Congress has been one of the most willing partners to actually free up the services to move fast. And we're going to have to do that again. Because I tell you, when I was a young captain, the person I wanted to grow up to be was the Colonel Program Director. That's who I wanted to be. The last person in the world I wanted to be was a general, because their job sucked. And that's proven right. But holy cow, the colonels. Why did I want to be a Colonel Program Director? Because they had all the money and all the authority, and that's how you go fast. But you have to give them, just like you do any soldier in command and control, any soldier on the battlefield. You have to give them rules of engagement. This is what you can and can't do. And you have to give them clear requirements. Do this and move fast. And if you do that, we can enable speed again, because the JROC just took a trip. You normally would go see the COCOMs. Chief, when you were there, the JROC trip was always out to the COCOMs. We didn't go to the COCOMs this time. We talked to the COCOMs every day. Through COVID, through anything, we talked to COCOMs every day, so we didn't. We went to see the innovation elements of our services. We went to see the innovation elements of our country. In many cases, that's not the traditional defense companies. We saw Boeing, we saw Northrop, we saw all the big companies, but we also saw little companies and companies in Silicon Valley that deliver software every day when I fight to get a software delivery every 4 years. And the JROC saw that this country still innovates, still has the technology advantage over anybody in the world. We're just not taking advantage of it in the Department of Defense. So we were motivated to come back and do that. We took that trip in April, and we signed the JROCMs that directed the new strategic directives in July. So we're trying to move fast. We're trying to enable the department to move fast. But I'm running out of time. As our good friend Frank Gorent said, 4 stars only have 2 things in common. Number 1, we'll all circle in the drain, which means we're about done. And number 2, we all wish we could go back and start all over again. Because, man, it is a great ride. It's a great country. And this country can go fast. It absolutely can go fast. And we've seen it. You see it in this country every day. We just have to enable it again in the Department of Defense. And I know that we will. So, Hawk, thank you very much for the opportunity. Arnold, thank you for doing this. Mark, good luck at the ETI. Good luck with this whole concept. Sadly, it is desperately needed. And I look forward to your success. Now I'll be glad to take some questions.
John, thank you very much. And folks, the Vice Chairman has graciously agreed to answer a few questions. I know there's some pressing things out there, and we have a microphone, so if you have something, please raise your hand.
Questions, just raise your hand. There's a microphone that's been recorded. There's a couple in the back.
Very back.
I'm sorry, this Q&A is just for attendees at this time.
All right.
John, I know you and I have talked about this. Have we changed our wargaming, and have we made it more realistic, in your opinion?
So the answer is no. But one of the requirements documents the JROC just published is a requirement for integrated modeling and simulation capabilities in all domains. Why would the JROC publish a requirement like that? Because it is a warfighting requirement that we actually be able to do that. We have a pretty good capability to model air, land, and sea, but we can't model air, land, sea, space, and cyber. We can't model air, land, sea, space, cyber, and the electromagnetic spectrum that covers all those domains. We can't pull those in, and so when we actually fight or look at a whole campaign, you have to make so many assumptions about what is happening in the other domains. That's why you see, our competitors spending enormous amounts of money in space and cyber, enormous amounts of money in nukes, because they understand that we've had an advantage in those areas for a long time, and if they can make that their advantage, then we're in a significant world of hurt. So I signed a requirements document to the department. We're working closely with not just the folks in A&S and R&E, but the folks in CAPE too, because guess who else needs a real campaign model that can actually look at all domains? CAPE does. And the cost analysis and program evaluation, because their tools are basically program execution tools. They desperately need the full campaign model as well. So it's interesting partnership. The JROC and CAPE have the same need for actually different reasons, but in summation, those needs are actually the same thing. How do we look at the entire force and make sure we understand how things play together, and to be able to turn it quickly and do hundreds and hundreds, maybe even millions of runs in the time it takes us to do one war game with 200 people, all smart people set up, which is what we did in October, we learn lessons from. You want to be able to learn a lot faster than that.
I know we've looked at force versus force so much. We've ignored a larger piece of that.
You have to be able to look at not just force versus force, but kinetic versus non-kinetic. You have to understand all the elements playing together. You have to understand your allies and partners coming in. We have a terrible time modeling allies and partners. One of the interesting things about allies and partners, if you think about the data structure I just defined, we have to address a classification problem because we are way overclassified in most of all of our capabilities. We have to normalize our classification problem. So I'm working with the Office of Secretary of Defense, and I'm working with the Congress as well. normalize that process. But even if we do that, we still have a problem because we like to label things secret no foreign. And then even our closest allies, they can't get onto our basic secret system, CIPRNet. They can't get onto that system because of all the no foreign stuff that's on the system. But if you actually build a cloud and tag your data correctly, all it turns into for you as a young soldier with your credentials and your biometrics, you can hook in, and anything you're allowed to access, you can access in the cloud. That'll be done by who you are. Well, that applies to allies and partners too. And that kind of construct, which we've written the requirement for now, will absolutely enable allies and partners to move forward. And then you can figure out how to model the ally and partner capability, because they can bring whatever they need into the fight without having a difficult time. Large, small, doesn't matter. Whatever you bring, we can figure out how to put that into the fight. Friends are our biggest advantage, but not being able to take full advantage of the friends is just criminal. That's an overstatement. Wrong is a better statement. Yes.
Hi, General Hyten. Tara Kopp with Defense One. This morning across the river, we will also be hearing from the White House on the end of combat operations in Iraq and a shift to the advisory role. In your view, is it necessary to kind of end these long-term, large-scale ground military operations that we've been doing for the last 20 years in Iraq to be able to fully move forward into the necessary innovations that you see? And then secondly, if you could talk a little bit more about the October exercises and what you learned and how you saw what the adversary was doing to show that the joint warfighting concept as written was a failure. Thank you.
So no concept that is exercised is a failure, first of all. I hate the fact that failure has become a bad word. It's a learning process, and we have to make sure that we fail, and we fail quickly, and we learn from our failures and move fast. So I don't look at that as a bad thing. I look at that as a good thing. The only bad thing is, like Dick McCon said, that it takes us so long to build up a war game to actually learn those lessons. We ought to be able to learn those like that. But to go back to the first question, the job of the United States military is to defend this nation against all threats. We support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That's what we swear an oath to every time we swear that oath. So when we look at the threats, we have to be ready to deal with those threats. And we've been dealing with a significant threat in the Middle East for a long time. That has required significant blood and treasure for us to defend ourselves against that threat. And the fact that there's been no large-scale attack since 9/11 of 2001 against the United States is a remarkable achievement by the whole of government, but primarily on the backs of the soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines that have done that work over the years. Now, it's a political decision about when you end that conflict. And the people across the river get to make that decision. We get to implement those decisions. That's the way it worked. But I can tell you that the primary risk to this nation, the long-term risk, is China. Maybe the nearer-term risk is Russia. And we have to make sure that we focus our attention on those. So that means, and you've seen it in Afghanistan, and you're seeing it play out now in Iraq, and I'm not going to make any announcements today, because that's the job of the folks across the river to make those announcements. But what you can see is an understanding that we have to not ignore the threats in the Middle East, but deal with the threats in the Middle East in a different way, with a smaller footprint, so we can divert more of our body on the threats in China and Russia. So that's where we're moving there. Now, as for the joint warfighting concept and how it failed, it failed in many different ways. But we had basically attempted an information-dominant structure where information was ubiquitous to our forces, just like it was in the first Gulf War, just like it has been for the last 20 years, just like everybody in the world, including China and Russia, have watched us do for the last 30 years. That's exactly, and so we just decided, well, to keep fighting with all that information being fully available. Well, what happens if right from the beginning that information is not available? you have a big problem. And that's the big problem that we faced. And it goes back to what Mr. McCon just said, is that you have to be able to understand space and cyber. Space and cyber are interesting. They're two different commands, Cyber Command and Space Command in the military, but they fundamentally have the same mission, just work through two different domains. And the mission is to provide information, pathways for information, and deny information to adversaries. If you think about what we do in space, it's those three things. What we do in cyber, it's those three things. We just do them in very different domains. That's why I have two different commands. But to do those three things, you have to be able to control those domains. And when you can't, you have a significant challenge. So to figure out how to expand the space, how to aggregate your capabilities in order to be lethal, disaggregate in order to survive, those kind of structures were not in the first iteration of the warfighting concept, and that's why it failed. So there were a lot of questions in your question, so hopefully I addressed them all. Thanks.
John, we can't thank you enough for everything. We truly appreciate your time, and it was great to hear your comments. And you're not circling the drain.
Well, General Hyten, again, thank you, sir, for your insights and your support of this new institute that, frankly, I will say is dedicated to supporting you and the DOD and the four new concepts you talked about. And I can say for sure, because in industry, we're focused on this, and I think our department is also focused on this with your and other leadership, that we need to change the output and the performance goals of our department as we look to be better, faster, cheaper than our adversaries, particularly China. And we certainly pledge to you to be helpful in that direction. And so before I introduce Mac Thornberry, I want to recognize Dr. Alexis Ross, who's a senior NDIA fellow, but with Ellen Lord, she was in the front office with Mark Esterbruni's secretary and really was a key link to our industry, brought our senior leaders in to meet with the secretary to find out what he needed us to do. So between Ellen and Alexis and Al Schaefer and everybody else, we had a great, what we would call the two-way street, a flow of dialogue between industry and government that's so important, will be so important, General Hyten, going future as we look to the future. And that's the model that the current administration certainly needs to emulate. It is now my honor and distinct privilege to introduce the Honorable Mac Thornberry, former HASS chair and congressman from the 13th District of Texas. As chairman of the HASS, Congressman Thornberry passed some of the most consequential and historic NDIAs that ever passed. I say that as someone that had been doing this since the early 1970s. He was certainly helped in that regard by his staff director, Bob Simmons, a member of our executive committee. As you all know, Chairman Thornberry remains one of our most respected leaders on national and domestic security. He's going to be one of our founding ETI advisory board members, so we wanted to give him an opportunity to make a few comments. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Mac Thornberry.
Thank you, General Pinaro, and I just want to join in thanking General Hyten for being with us today. I don't think there's any question that there is no military leader in our country better suited to help advance these emerging technologies than General Hyten is. And we are all incredibly fortunate he is in this job at this time when we need speed among other things. If you think about it, what we have all lived through the past year and a half points to how essential this Emerging Technology Institute really is. Because in March of 2020, the country basically shut down over a virus. I don't know of any evidence that said it was intentionally inflicted upon the world, but what I do know is there were lots of folks around the world watching to see the effects of that virus, how it affected us, how it affected others, and I also know there's a lot of work in biotechnologies that are going on in a whole bunch of places. And just another example, not less than 3 months ago, a group based in Russia decided to launch a form of cyber attack against a pipeline, resulting in gas and jet fuel shortages in much of the country. Again, lots of folks were watching to see what the effects were of that sort of attack. And we could probably go through every one of these emerging technologies and things either have happened or could well happen that would affect our country beyond just bombers, tanks, invasion force, and the kind of traditional military that we have all thought about. Adversaries don't have to send those things to attack us anymore. These new technologies present both threats and opportunities. And the question is, will our country be able to advance each of them in order to not be at a disadvantage? There's no question that China has tremendous advantages with their command and control, all of nation approach, with the enormous effort that they are putting particularly into many of these technologies, and frankly with its lack of moral restraint. And so for us to compete successfully, my opinion is we need two things. One is we got to have all the players on the field. And that means obviously government. It means traditional military suppliers. It means non-traditional military suppliers. It means academia. It means the investment community. It means all our players have to be engaged. And the second thing we need is we've got to move at the speed of relevance. And man, I couldn't discuss that more or better than General Hyten just did. But we all know how quickly technology changes, how quickly events are moving in our world, how quickly decision making can take place in a command and control economy, and we have challenges. But from the beginning of our country, industry has been the indispensable partner to our armed forces in defending the country. And I would suggest it's truer now, and it's truer with these technologies than it's ever been. So using NDIA's unique ability to gather all of those resources that General Pinheiro laid out at the beginning to help convene and analyze and educate and recommend and develop partnerships can help make sure that the United States is where we need to be. The British military historian Sir Basil Littlehart wrote in 1944 that military history is filled with the record of military improvements that have been resisted. Between the development of new weapons or new tactics and their adoption, there's always been a time lag. And that time lag often decided the fate of nations. I think that's true. There's a lot at stake in this whole effort. And I have no doubt that the Emerging Technology Institute under Dr. Lewis's capable leadership will help us to meet those challenges as we all hope and pray that they do. Thank you.
Chairman Thornberry, thank you for those thoughts and for your support of the ETI mission. Now I want to bring up the person that is really responsible for ETI. This was his brainchild and vision. Dick McCon, a longtime colleague and friend and current chair emeritus of NDIA, will be our inaugural chairman of the ETI Advisory Board. I can unequivocally say that ETI would not exist today if it was not for Dick's drive and determination to bring ETI into existence. Dick saw the need for this type of institute early on. And he and I, of course, our offices are right across the street from each other in McLean, and we spent many a day at the McLean subway with Dick mapping out on a little subway napkin. Of course, when Dick McCon takes you to lunch, you don't go anywhere more expensive than the subway. But Dick then worked with our NDIA board and leadership to craft the approach we have today. So it's a great privilege to have my personal friend and colleague to ask him to speak about his vision at ETI going forward. Dick?
Thank you, Arnold. It's true about Subway. This is, I feel like, almost a father giving birth here. I should be handing out these cheap cigars from some drugstore. But I have to thank a lot of people for helping to get this started. It's been a team event. It's been an idea of mine for many years. Believe it or not, I get a lot of ideas from John Hyten, and John could speak to that, some of the things we've discussed over the past several years. In fact, we're just about to open a cyber innovation center out at the Air Force Academy that was John's idea and mine years ago, and I'm looking forward to that in a couple of weeks. But I want to thank Arnold, Hawk, Jim Boozer, the whole team from NDIA. They've been very supportive. And we were very lucky to land Mark Lewis. I'll talk about that in a minute. But the other thing is that I was almost surprised, but very pleased with the members that we were able to get to join our advisory board. Of course, we all know about Mac Thornberry and his background and what he's done for the country and what he continues to do. Ellen Lord, I've known for several years, our former Undersecretary for Acquisition and Sustainment, but she was the NDI vice chairman at one time, and I succeeded her. That's what brought me into all this stuff. And former company CEO, so she's got quite a background, and I'm aware of the companies that she worked for and the great job that she did there. I have to mention Mitch Daniels. He's not here, but I don't know how many of you know him, but he's a tremendous individual. He's a great thinker, just a fine person, and I was actually surprised. Now, I know how busy Mitch is. But as most of you know, besides the president of Purdue University, which has not raised its tuition in 10 years, by the way, and they host our initial hypersonics convention along with some help from Notre Dame, Mitch Daniels was also the governor of Indiana and also headed the OMB at one time, which one might argue is the second most powerful job in this town. You might disagree with me, Chairman Thornberry, but it's a very important job, as we all know. And then Paul Madera. Paul's a longtime friend. He's working with me on building the new Cyber Innovation Center out at the Air Force Academy, but he's got a great venture capital firm that's done extremely well, and he's a former fighter pilot. So we've got some former fighter pilots in the audience today. And finally, Arnold. I can't say enough about Arnold. He's on our board. He and I have worked so close together for so many years, and his foresight and his attention to detail and his drive have really helped to lift this organization that we have today. Thank you all, you people that are here today, for participating in our institute. I can't say enough good things about the fact that we have a great advisory board and the perspective they're going to bring not only to government, industry, but also academia. It's something that I, as chairman years ago, we had not involved the universities nor the labs. And I think we have Bill LaPlante here from the lab. We have others. And so we brought them into the defense community because they're a very important part of what we do in defense and will be a very important part. So I'm glad to see, I think we have about 30 universities involved now. Hawk, correct me if that number's gone up. It's up to 35. We have a great number of labs involved in our organization, besides the 1,600 plus the 1,600 plus corporate members that we have, and over 60-some thousand individuals. So in order to get this started, I started talking a couple of years ago to this bright guy I met at Purdue University one day, sitting next to me, a guy named Mark Lewis. And I talked to him about this emerging technology institute. And of course, you can see the result of it. He's here today and leading us. Now, it's a new organization that will provide leadership, bolster public awareness, and create independent, reliable research about technologies critical to our nation's economy and national defense, and especially emerging technologies. And we're going to provide some leadership outside of the government to bring together government, industry, innovators, academia, investors, and the American public in pursuit of economic integration, defense modernization, and technological primacy. As part of NDIA's 501c3 organization, that's important. We're a 501c3. We're nonpartisan in this particular organization, and I think it fits us well. ETI will support the modernization of the defense industrial base. I don't need to tell all of you in this room today that technologies are evolving at the most rapid pace in our history, and we have to adapt to secure our future success. And as been stated earlier, we have strong, tremendous competition. Most people don't even realize. I had lunch with our former defense attaché that came back from China, and I mentioned that the Chinese had stolen a lot of our technical data for the F-35, for the latest naval missile, and he was shaking his head while I was telling him this, and he said, "Dick, that's nothing. You can't imagine what they're exfiltrating and what they're stealing. It is just overwhelming." I mean, they're even a threat to Coca-Cola. You probably saw the lawsuit years ago where Coca-Cola sued a woman of Chinese origin for stealing the Coca-Cola secrets. So you can imagine sometime in the near future, you're going to see something with exactly the Coca-Cola can. It's going to taste just like Coca-Cola. It's going to be half the price of Coca-Cola around the world. So these are other threats that we don't even think about in the commercial sector, besides the military sector. And I think we'll play into all of that. So I think a lot of you know the background of Mark. As I said, I think we were very lucky to get him. We courted him for quite a while, and with the administration change, otherwise we might not have been able to get him. But as the acting Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering, former chief scientist in the Air Force, and Norty, you might not know this, but he was at IDA as the director for quite a while, for long enough. But anyway, Mark, thank you for being our first director, and come on up and talk to the folks. Thank you.
So Dick, I do have to start off by saying when you introduce me as the first director, it's a little bit like when my wife introduces me as her first husband. But but thank you. So I have my own quandary this morning, which is what could I possibly say that would improve on the comments that we've already heard, first from General Hyten, from Congressman Thornberry. It's a pleasure to be here, though, and especially an honor and a privilege to see so many friends and so many colleagues in the audience. Thank you so much for joining us. This is really an exciting endeavor. I'll start out by saying that I actually also wish we didn't require an Emerging Technologies Institute. I wish it wasn't needed. I wish these things. I wish the problems that we're planning on tackling, we've begun to tackle, weren't problems that remain on our plate. But we are certainly going to give it our best go to try to address some of these pressing issues. I like to remind people we are in a race, I think, as General Hyten very accurately pointed out. And it's an existential race, therefore a race that we dare not lose. To kind of kick that off, one of our first activities in the Emerging Technologies Institute was the workshop that General Hyten already mentioned, the Modernization Quandary Workshop. And I want to give lots of credit to my very dear friend and colleague, Al Schaefer, who actually came to this with the idea of starting out by framing this big picture issue, which was how do you introduce emerging technologies, how do you address modernization with all the constraints and limitations that are imposed upon us. And as Al laid out the problem very accurately, I think building on some of the work of Mackenzie Eaglin and the American Enterprise Institute, he pointed out first, as General Hyten also mentioned, fall of the Soviet Union, we had 9/11 attacks, kind of refocused our military. Now, of course, we've got the perfect storm of modernization requirements, nuclear modernization, replacing submarines, missiles, bombers, all at the same time. Desire to go to full rate production of the F-35, expansion of the Navy, Army development of long-range fires. We have programs of the Missile Defense Agency, the RKV being replaced by NGI. investments required for legacy microelectronics, and then, of course, all the new capabilities that we're trying to bring to bear. Artificial intelligence. Hypersonics is being championed by the Joint Hypersonic Transition Office. All these capabilities. And then, of course, we saw a budget that was recently released that was an increase, the Pentagon budget, that was an increase over the previous year's budget, except when you account for inflation and all those other constraints, it actually winds up being a real decrease in budget. So with that context, we convened a workshop, a one-day workshop, and General Schwartz, a lesson I learned from IDA is don't just admire the problem. Actually come up with active solutions. So we convened a workshop, and we asked our participants to come up with active solutions. We were kicked off with some incredibly insightful comments from Hondo Gertz, a good friend of many of us in this room, who kind of got us off. And then we focused in three areas. One was technology. The other was in process. And then the third was the legislative perspective. And we asked our panelists to give us some meaningful directions. Technology panel had some really interesting comments. One, they actually focused on the relationship between the Department of Defense and Congress, with the realization that everyone seems to recognize the problem. Everyone's kind of on the same page. And so there was a call for better communication between the Pentagon, frankly, and Capitol Hill. And that was a theme that echoed throughout the workshop. Specific technological suggestions focus on zero trust, something that Alan and I and Al worked on significantly when we were all in the E-Ring, but taking the idea of zero trust out of the cyber world and applying it more broadly, including across the board in microelectronics. And then, as General Hyten mentioned, some of the issues related to classification of data, to expand the limits of what we can release. And that's especially important if we're going to get the universities, our best and the brightest, working on the problems of interest to us. So overall, suggestions on standardization of software data structures to maximize the degree to which information can be shared. Then we turned it over to an acquisition panel. And the acquisition panel came up with a number of interesting recommendations. One was a suggestion for overhauling the planning, programming, and budgeting and execution process, pointing out that it's a process that was developed some years back and frankly is just not agile enough in many ways to address these rapidly changing scenarios. Also from the acquisition panel, there was a suggestion that we focus again on zero trust technologies, as well as digital engineering as a way to accelerate acquisition processes, and that's a theme that echoed comments that came out of our technology panel. And then finally, we turned it over to a legislative panel. And the legislative panel had some incredibly insightful comments. Again, echoing some of the points about better communication. We bluntly had a leader from Capitol Hill saying, when the Pentagon comes to us on year one and says, this is our top requirement and we're going to stop doing that other thing. And then they come the next year and they say, no, we changed. Now that's our top requirement. The thing we said last year was our top requirement, no longer our top requirement. That type of inconsistency of message kind of, frankly, doesn't contribute to our rapid advancement, rapid development. And then one other insightful comment was that we need to collectively, together, the department, industry, academia, Congress, articulate the threat clearly and concisely that our peer competitors, such as Russia and China, are posing to our national security. And getting that message out to the American public so they truly understand the threats that we are facing and the need to go quickly was actually would be an absolutely essential accomplishment. Overall, a message that came from the workshop, at the end of the day, it's about cultural change. And those are very, very difficult to enact. We used to say in the Pentagon, when strategy meets culture, culture wins every time. But trying to initiate those cultural changes. A change includes the way we think about trust, the way we handle data, the way we handle intellectual property, changes to the way we communicate within ourselves, across government, and outside of government to the public at large. And then finally, being open to constant and bold experimentation in all aspects, being willing to fail. Not fail, as I like to say, in dumb ways, failing in smart ways so that we learn from those failures and we move forward. Making those right policy changes, those investments, we felt collectively will be the things that help ensure American supremacy for decades to come. The wrong policies, investments risk, frankly, ceding global leadership. The right investments, right policies, and ultimately right culture changes will secure our national defense and our nation for many years to come. So with that, I want to again thank you all for joining us today. And I think now we're supposed to be going to the video. The American way of war, and more importantly, America's ability to deter war in the first place, depends on technological superiority. Today, more than ever, American military superiority equates with their advanced technologies and the men and women who utilize them. But we're at risk of losing our edge with peer competitors who are investing heavily in a number of critical areas.
For the first time since the Cold War, we face the prospect of having adversaries with superior technology. As we speak, peer competitors are learning from us, innovating, and investing heavily in critical technologies.
The Emerging Technologies Institute, ETI, is a new organization committed to ensuring the U.S. maintains technological superiority.
ETI will help align and prioritize issues amongst all stakeholders. Collaboration today means success tomorrow.
Smart investments in these technologies today will transform the experience of the warfighter tomorrow.
We must equip our men and women with the best, the premier technologies to ensure our national defense in the future.
We are in a race, and to win this race, we need your help. Together, we can make sure that the United States military remains the best, most technologically superior fighting force in the world.
Well, my personal thanks to everybody here today, and I also want to express our appreciations for the support from the NDIA and ETI teams, our leader, Hawk Carlisle, the logistics, our Chief Operating Officer, Jim Boozer. I want to thank Alexandra Phelps from the Pinkston organization, and especially the ETI Advisory Board, which will have its inaugural meeting following this event. And I certainly appreciate the participation of the media and C-SPAN, because one of the goals of ETI is to educate both leaders in our country, both in the government and in industry and in the private sector, as well as the American public, about the need to promote and develop in these emerging technologies that are essential both for our country's economic success and the defense deterrence that General Hyten spoke so eloquently about. So thank everybody for being here today. It's a great pleasure to host you all here, and it's also a great privilege to be able to recognize ETI on its founding day. Thank you very much.